Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show. Hope you're having a great day. I want to welcome our listeners from the Jackson metro area and the Mississippi Delta, along with the Mississippi Gulf Coast, as we continue to celebrate so many amazing people who are working in the trenches to make Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. And listen, as we were setting up today, I was reminded as I was playing a little bit of Vivaldi and some Beethoven and other classical music from my friend, the producer of this show, Cal Curley. How lucky I am to have Cal Curley, who's more kind of a rock guy. But Cal, you kind of turn your mic on. You have a wide variety of music that you enjoy, don't you?
I do. You said that was your 3 a.m. music. My early morning music selections is more of a Jamie Johnson to get going.
I like Jamie Johnson, Alabama man, for sure. That's good music. Really
I have
good
like
music.
3-4 songs from him that I just put on rotate, and it's usually the same order every morning.
Yeah. Soulful music. Yeah.
Yep.
Mozart's my thinking music, Kyle. Mozart. It's always going to be my go-to music when I want to really write something important. I'm going to listen to Mozart.
When I have to do stuff that's very important, I've turned into my dad, where I've got to turn everything off, turn the music down so I can see. I never understood that when I was a kid, but I get it now.
Man, I get it. Listen, thanks for all you're doing to support the show. We really appreciate it.
You bet.
Hey, listen, I look back in my time in leadership when I was involved as the publisher of the Sun Herald, and people have heard many different ways to talk about this, but the experience of Hurricane Katrina and the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and working closely with Governor Haley Barbour, having the real honor of writing the foreword to his book, America's Great Storm. I got to know so many great people, but one of them is Henry Barbour. And Henry he was the executive director for the Governor's Commission on Recovery, Rebuilding, and Renewal. And he and I were reflecting before this show started a bit about how much time has passed. But it's also amazing how fast time flies. And it's good to keep friendships like with people like Henry. And I've invited Henry on. We're going to talk about the national political situation these days. Without any further ado, let me welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show my friend Henry Barbour. How you doing, Henry?
I'm doing great, Ricky.
Yeah.
It's always great to be with you. And I do, Katrina was such a, devastating tragedy. But I look back at it with such pride with what the people of Mississippi did and what Haley did and what Marcia did and what Ricky Matthews did and just so many Gulf Coast leaders to bring back the coast, bigger and better than it was, and just a lot of courage. It was an honor for me to get to work on that recovery. It was just a real life experience.
Yeah, we really got an opportunity to see what happens when you're faced with the worst natural disaster in American history and you see these leaders emerge. We've talked a little bit about this before, but some leaders you would have expected to emerge did. Others you expected to emerge, they didn't. And the reason they didn't is because their businesses were wiped out, their homes were wiped out. I mean, everything that they own no longer existed, at least the physical pieces of it. Some lost family members. I mean, it was one of those things. And then the other thing, the great learning for me was the leaders that stepped up that you never expected to step up. They were always in the community sort of quietly doing their thing. And the learning that I got from that, and I wrote about it, was that we tend to move too fast and we tend to not really focus enough on the people around us to understand the essence of who they are. And in the moment of Katrina, we got a chance to understand the essence of who everybody was, because when the going got tough, the really tough got going, and we got to see who they were, and we worked shoulder to shoulder with them. And that was, to me, one of the biggest gifts of Katrina, is seeing that spirit in my fellow leaders. I know you saw the same thing.
Yeah, and one of the things, being a Republican operative, one of the things that I really appreciated is that all folks from the coast came together. I don't care what political party you were or what neighborhood you lived in, everybody was affected. and folks came together, and it's a lot like the country came together after 9/11, and the trials in life. It's how do you respond to them? It can make you stronger, and it certainly made the coach stronger. And I really think looking back at it, for Haley, I feel like the Lord put him in that leadership spot and prepared his life the way that he did, to be ready for that moment. And I think he was.
He really was. One of the great things about the book, and this will kind of lead us to the conversation I want to have with you today about kind of the state of the national political situation. One of the great things about the book is we not only are able to read about the massive amount of effort that was going on the ground to try to understand in as detailed a way as we possibly could what it was going to take to dig ourselves out of this mess, and to do as Haley challenged us to think of our kids and our kids' kids and what they would say of us, and we wanted them to say of us that we didn't lose the opportunity to build this place back bigger and better, that we weren't going to just build back what was there. We weren't going to let status quo prevail, but we were going to raise the bar in the recovery effort. That stuff was going on. But the other part of it was what he was doing in these unbelievable regular trips to Washington to align Democrats and Republicans around a recovery plan for Mississippi. And, Mary Landrieu, God bless her, had asked for, I think, $250 billion without a plan attached to it. It caused this chilling effect in Congress, and Haley had to overcome that. And the way he overcame it with first of all, the relationships he had built over so many years that, incidentally, the Musgrove campaign said was not a good thing. It turned out to be a great thing for Mississippi in that moment. But the other thing was the information that we were developing locally and how that was feeding into his mission in Washington to create clarity around the kind of things that we needed in terms of infrastructure, et cetera. But to see the way, as you pointed out, as after 9/11 we saw it, we certainly saw it after Katrina, but the way Congress came together around helping us rebuild is an amazing story of bipartisanship. And I wish that we would see that more. One of the things I see actually is, and people can say that this is a bad thing, it depends on where you're sitting, I guess. But you see in Mike Johnson, Speaker Mike Johnson, someone who recognizes to achieve goals for this nation, we have to be willing to cross the aisle. And that's not a bad thing. That means that we're going to work together on bipartisan efforts where we can do that. That's a good thing. But we need to see more of that. We saw it during Katrina and after Katrina. That gave us kind of a watershed moment to see what is possible. And we haven't seen it much since then, sadly. There have been a moment here or there, but the reality is we've got a lot of work to do, don't we, Henry?
We do. We do, as a community, as a state, as a country. And, we got to stand up for our principles. We need to think about results, short-term, long-term. How do we get there? What are the things that we need to do? And how do we work together, whether it's talking about the legislature, whether it's talking about industry, schools, whatever it is, all these different things, churches. How do we have a plan, and how do we go pursue it? And and I've learned in politics, the politicians who focus on results and who get results get reelected, and the ones that talk about the past and talk about sort of divisive stuff, they put themselves in political peril. And America needs new direction. That's for sure. And I will say, you mentioned Speaker Mike Johnson, who just came out from nowhere to be the speaker, and which tells you, the House Republicans were like going through. It's almost a lottery, there in the House. Who are we going to put up next after they got rid of McCarthy? And Mike Johnson comes from nowhere, and had to clearly, learning on the job and thinking about things and realizing, oh my gosh, what is happening, let's just say with Russia and Ukraine and the Russians and Putin, in a lot of ways wanting to sort of rebuild the Soviet Union. And let's start with the Ukraine. Just taking a country and I think surprisingly, Ukrainians really, showing some real fight. And I think Mike Johnson realized, what's going to happen in that country with these people's lives in so many ways. I'm going to decide whether they actually have enough bullets to protect themselves, to fight back. And so I'm just tickled to death with what Mike Johnson's doing. And he's trying to get results for the people.
Well, we'll actually pick it up from right there when we come back. The normalizing of Putin, what a surprising trend. It's amazing to me that happened. And I'm so thrilled to see him push up against that and say, wait a minute, guys, let's bring sanity back to the conversation. Hey, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Henry Barbour. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. I have Henry Barbour with us today. Hey, we're going to get back to the conversation we were having just a few minutes ago about Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House, and how he came out of nowhere and how his leadership is beginning to really take hold. It's an interesting thing, especially with the threats against him. We'll talk about some of that here in just a second. But before we go any further, I want to kind of lay the groundwork on who Henry Barbour is, because if you've just come to the show recently and you've not heard a conversation with Henry Barbour, I think it might be important to hear what is Capital Resources and what is his history with the Republican Party, which is actually quite extensive. Let's kind of give him the kind of the short version of who you are.
All right, Ricky. Well, so I grew up in Yazoo City and grew up in a political family. Didn't really realize it at the time. Went to Ole Miss and ended up working on George Bush campaign in 1988. And that got me started into, working in political campaigns, and spent several years in D.C., learned a lot, and came back and started running campaigns and ran Chip Pickering's races for Congress, and then ran Haley's race for governor in 2003, which was kind of fun. And then I was 39 years old at that point, 20 years ago, and John Lundy and Claire Hester reached out to me. They had a firm called Capital Resources. It was a lobbying firm, and I always said, I'm never going to be a lobbyist. Well, be careful what you say you're never going to do. And so anyway, I joined the firm, and we just started growing the firm over the years, and we have expanded, Ricky, into 10 states, essentially across the South. We started up 2 other companies, one called Bullseye Public Affairs that does a lot of corporate public affairs work and does a lot of political campaign work, which is more of where I spend my time. I actually do very, very little lobbying. And we started a third firm called ARC Insights, led by a guy named Nicholas Thompson, who's a pollster, and it does public opinion strategies and polling, focus groups. And I'm married. I have 3 daughters, and my daughter Lucy just had my first grandchild. We're excited about that. And, I enjoy politics, but, love Mississippi, and I want to see Mississippi and Yazoo City do well.
Well, if you go back and look at your efforts in the Republican Party, you've been heavily engaged over a long period of time around policy. And obviously the Republican Party has gone through a lot of changes. There's been a tug of war more recently of the far right pushing up against the more moderate part of the Republican Party. If you were talking to someone about kind of where we are today, given your extensive experience with all of these evolutions, I would say you've really stood the test of time through tremendous change in the Republican Party. You're still there, and you still influence those conversations, which I think is a real testament to you and your leadership. But how do you just talk about it in a kind of an abbreviated way about where we are today?
Well, number one, the party's one thing, and look, we're all Americans first. And, 82% of Americans said in a recent poll, Harvard-Harris poll, we need a new president. And that's just fundamental. About 25% of the people in the country think the country's on the right track. And somewhere 35 to 40% think that Joe Biden is doing a good job. And I don't believe those 35% really think that, but maybe they do. So we need change in the country. We need to get the country back on track. It's really important. And the Republican Party, look, it has become a much more populist party under the leadership of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump another guy who kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, obviously people knew who he was, but I'll say I didn't take him seriously as a candidate when he came down the golden escalator in 2015. But ironically, he connected with working class Americans. And it's just ironic that it's this billionaire from New York, but he really became their champion. And I think one of the good things that Donald Trump did for the party is move us away from being a party of big business and Wall Street to being the party of working class folks, whether you're white, black, Hispanic, Asian American, whatever. Now, I will say, Donald Trump wasn't my choice. I was for Nikki Haley in this past primary. I am supporting Donald Trump. I want a Republican administration because we do need to get the country back on track. But one of the things that I wish that Donald Trump would do less of is practice what I call the politics of division. If he would practice the politics of addition, and look, elections not real complicated. It is about math. You got to have more votes than the other side. And if you want to have more votes, you need to grow. And if you want to grow, you need people to feel included and to talk about issues that unite us, not divide us. And so Trump, I think, struggles with that. But I'm sitting here in Yazoo City, and he's been president of the United States, so he's got skills, obviously. But as a party, I really believe, and I think Speaker Johnson is leading in this direction. I think a lot of our governors are leading this direction, including Tate Reeves. Focus on results. Focus on policy, the things that matter to the people, that matter to their lives. Make sure that they have more freedom, not less, and more opportunity as best the government, can decide these things. And so I don't know if that's a good answer, but those are things, run around in my head.
Well, but when you think about Speaker Johnson, when you think about kind of where he was, because I would have analyzed him as being way more to the right. And then what you see in a leader is someone who's saying, whoa, let's slow down a little bit. In order to be successful, we have to think more moderately about some things. We can't let just a populist message, say, about Putin, influence reality and what we need to do as leaders. You see him changing before our very eyes, and he seems to have support around that. I see that as a great trend.
I think the country is hungry for that kind of leadership, and I think Donald Trump's listening to him. Which is encouraging to me for the future of the party, but even more importantly, the future of the country. But Mike Johnson realizes a few basic things that Congress has got to do. It's got to pass a budget. It's got to keep the government operating. No matter how pissed off you might get about your taxes or, some crazy thing the government does, we need the government running 365 days out of the year. Mike Johnson understands that. And he also understands we need to be secure and safe, whether it's in our community, whether you're in Gulfport or Biloxi, or you're in Jackson or Madison or Yazoo City. You want to be safe. You want crime to be controlled as best you can. And then obviously national security. he understands that we don't need chaos in the world. And if we have chaos in the world, that's bad. And people that create chaos, China, Russia, particularly Putin, how do we try to take away power from them, particularly when they have just gone and taken the power like Putin with tanks? That's unacceptable. And so I think Mike Johnson had to look in the mirror and realize, I'm the speaker. This is my moment. This is my life. This is where the Lord has put me. And I just couldn't be more pleased with what he's doing. And I will say, you used the word moderate, that we got to be more moderate. I wouldn't use the word moderate. I would just say, I think we can defend our principles. We can focus on results. We do have to be pragmatic.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
He only has like a 2-vote margin in the House. So he can't get the whole loaf of bread, but he'd like a couple of pieces. And I think that's what Mike Johnson realizing, and I think that's what he's accomplishing as Speaker of the House. I'm proud of him.
What do you? Okay, so we'll probably get a little bit ahead of what we sort of plan to think about. But you think about the balance of power, because you just alluded to it, the balance of power in Congress, especially in the House. Well, it's obviously in the both, but as it relates to Mike Johnson, this motion to vacate and how we're overcoming that stuff. I mean, razor thin. So what impact do you think? I tell you what, we're at the end of this segment. So why don't we do this? When we get back on the other side, this razor thin margin that we just talked about, how is this going to play out with the midterms? How is all of these various pieces? What's the research tell us about how that's going to play out? And are we going to see a more conservative or more opportunities for a conservative point of view, or are we going to be having this wrestling match even in a new era of with a new president? Because I think we'll definitely probably have a new president before all this is said and done. When we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Henry Barbour. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. We have Henry Barbour from Capital Resources, and longtime Republican, been extraordinarily active in the Republican Party for a bunch of years. And we were just talking about balance of power and the upcoming midterms, and what some of the public opinion research stuff starting to tell us. But hey, let's kind of go back a little bit, because you see, when you go back and look at what happened in Florida and how successful Florida was with Republican nominees, and you saw losses in other states. How much you think we're going to be more like Florida in the future as it relates to that, or are we going to continue to lose some ground? What's the current thinking within the Republican Party about that?
Well, I think we have seen different examples of what I think it's a better path, and what is a more divisive path and less focused on policy and results. And we saw, Ricky, in the 22 election cycle, that the Republican candidates who focused on results, who focused on an aspirational message for the country, did much, much better than candidates who were focused on the past. In 22, we had some candidates, all they wanted to do was talk about, well, the 2020 election was stolen, and they just stayed focused on that. Well, American people have moved on. They're interested in the future. What can you do for my family? And so I think if we have candidates and a message in 2024 that is more like what a lot of gubernatorial candidates, Brian Kemp in Georgia, Ron DeSantis in Florida, that you mentioned, if they're focused on results, and I think this is one reason that Tate Reeves was elected in 2023 last year, is he's gotten some results, and that's what matters to the voters, and so that's where we need to be focused this year. And you talk about the House. The House has 435 members. 22 of those seats are considered toss-ups. 22. So most of them pretty well know what's going to happen. In the 4 congressional districts in Mississippi, it would be huge upset if any of our incumbents lost. But in Alabama, in Louisiana, because of redistricting, both states tried to create a majority-minority district, and both Garrett Graves in Louisiana, who was part of the McCarthy team and who is a very policy-oriented, I'll say results-oriented legislator, very effective. But he's going to be in a tough race against a guy named Cleo Fields. And that's a race that could decide literally who's going to be speaker. Is he going to be a conservative or is he going to be a liberal? And then in Alabama, the second congressional district was also redrawn, and it's going to be a tough race for Republicans to win. So that's probably a Democrat pickup. And just a handful of these races, New York, California, there's 5 or 6 races in both states where Republicans had been winning in districts where Biden won in 20. Can we maintain that? And then, of course, the Senate. Roger Wicker's up for re-election this year. He should be fine. And I will say, if Republicans take the Senate, which is likely, Roger is likely to be the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, which for the coast, for all of Mississippi, is hugely important. But the reason I say Republicans are likely to win 33 races in the Senate this year, and 23 of those are Democrat races, and 7 of those 23 are competitive races in the Senate. And so in states like Arizona, West Virginia, that is not even competitive. Republicans are going to pick that seat up. But Arizona, Nevada, Montana, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, those are all states where Republicans could win. And of course, that'll have some effect on the presidential, even though the presidential more likely to affect them. How does that race go?
Yeah.
And we'll see.
Hey, but Henry, I for one was thrilled that we were nullifying to a large degree those who wanted to look back, because they represented to me an arm of the party that is not good representation of what the party is all about. And so this focus on looking forward is a good thing.
That's right. And I will say, Marjorie Taylor Greene's push to have a vote to vacate the speakership is misguided as anything happening in Washington right now. And she's Republican from North Georgia, and but I just cannot comprehend what she hopes to accomplish other than to get another hit on Fox News.
Yeah. And
it's not good for the party, and it's certainly not good for our friend the speaker. But people are pushing back in the House, and so I think it's going to fail. Democrats are not even going to let it come up for a vote. And it's interesting to me, but I think it speaks to that overall political point I was making, is people are much more interested in results and how do you affect the things that happen in their household and the schools and the community.
Yeah. Hey, 2 other things that I wanted to mention from what you said earlier. One is, when I was publisher of the Times-Picayune and NOLA.com, I had the opportunity to watch Garrett Graves' ascension into becoming a congressman. And I've watched him as a congressman, and he was uniquely prepared for that position. And his willingness to dive in and not just take sort of the party line, but to do his homework and be able to speak to issues in a very detailed way, that has suited him really well. The thought that he might be on a bubble is a little scary, because we need people like Garrett Graves in Congress.
Yeah, he got the short end of the stick in redistricting, and that's a political process, and he just got the short end of that stick. But he is working very hard. I've gotten, encouraging reports about that race. I think we're much more likely, we being Republicans, to win that seat than the one in Alabama. I think it's tougher. The one in Alabama is about a +10 Biden district, but that one will be decided we need turnout, and that's where the overall race of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, will play a huge role. And in states like Alabama and Mississippi, where Democrat voters don't have a lot of reason to go vote this fall because the congressional races are already basically decided, and Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana are going to vote for Trump. That's how that'll help Garrett Graves. That'll help Republican candidate in Alabama because I think turnout on our side, could be bigger, and our being Republican. And it'll be interesting to see, how that plays. But there's a lot going on in the presidential, as that comes. But it's an environment where the country wants change. And a lot of folks who are not normally traditionally Republican, young people, African-American, Hispanic, Asian-American, they are very open to voting for Donald Trump. And so I think if Trump can reach out to them, make them feel included, Trump could be a big winner this fall.
Hey, listen, I had the opportunity to MC a salute to military event down on the coast a couple of years ago, and Roger was the featured speaker. Of course, I knew him from when I was publisher, and it was good to see him. And when he was talking, I was struck by how, with all the national political situation happening the way that it was happening, all the polarization and all of this, he still had his own mind within the context of all that. He still believed in the things that he believed in, and he wasn't going to just toe certain lines. I think he's really transcended these rough waters really well, and his strength as a leader in the Senate he's gotten stronger, and it's been great watching that. Is that kind of your read on it as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, Roger, was in the state Senate, and then, he gets elected to Congress in 1994, and Trent and Thad, were the two big boys, right? And, everybody, yes, sir, Senator, yes, sir. And Roger, when he got into the Senate, it's been fun to watch him grow. And he has really grown into being the kind of leader that Trent Lott was and Thad Cochran. And so really proud of Roger. And he's making a big difference in the Senate. And he's a guy that is willing sometimes to stand up for things that he knows aren't going to be popular.
Right.
But he's determined that they're right. Yeah. And that he should lead. And so I'm proud of Roger, and obviously I'm proud of Cindy Hyde-Smith. She is also in the same way growing as a senator.
And one more comment about Roger, sort of becoming this elder statesman in the Senate, and it's great to see a senator from Mississippi establishing themselves in that way. Hey, when we come back, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about what's going on college campuses today, among other things. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio, and I'm having, as usual, a terrific conversation with Henry Barbour from Capital Resources. He's obviously had a long history in the Republican Party, so it's good to catch up, Henry, as usual. Hey, listen, man, we could spend a whole show talking about what's happening on our college campuses today as it relates to Israel, and what's guiding that. I mean, the role that social media is playing, the role that DEI might be playing, what role, there's so many different things, even some white privilege guilt that some people suggest could be happening on those campuses, causing them to have this sort of misdirected whatever. But it's troubling to watch. And, what's your take on it?
Well, I think it's important to start with the fact that Hamas hates Jews. They hate Jews so much, they want them all dead. That is not hyperbole. That is their stated mission. They want to get rid of Israel, and not just Israel, but the Jews. And so you got to understand that as a starting point. And, they came in on October 7, and, this terrible, horrific attack just killing, raping, pillage. I mean, it's just, just awful. And Israel obviously has had to defend themselves, and they have. And war is an ugly thing. And there are some people caught in the middle. And these are the Palestinian people who, at no fault of their own, live in Gaza, live with Hamas in control, and they're dying, by the thousands. And it is horrific and terrible. And so, I can make an argument. I can understand why a 22-year-old at Columbia has a heart for the Palestinian people in Gaza and just the horrific situation that they're in. And if we all should have a heart for those poor people. But what's happening on college campuses is, I think there are a lot of people, and you see these in interviews, they don't know really any of the basics, which is why I kind of wanted to start with that, of what's happening over there. And I'm not saying that everything Israel has done is right, because there are clear examples of it not being. But it's fine to have a peaceful protest, but quickly what is happening in places like New York, LA, and elsewhere, people are breaking the law. And even the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, has talked recently about how professional operators are coming in and they are teaching and basically telling these college kids, here's what you need to do. Here's, you need to take this building. You need, all these different schemes or just tactics to cause turmoil and break the law. And the minute you start breaking the law, that's when you're on the wrong side. And anyway, it's very troubling, and this didn't all just percolate up in the last month. This is stuff that's been coming for a long time.
What's interesting? Someone made the point the other day. Look at America's response to 9/11, and look how many people were killed. Look at America's response to Pearl Harbor and Hiroshima and Nagasaki and so on. In a lot of ways, I mean, as you point out, war is terrible. War is, who can say that they like anything about war? But when you look at Israel's really kind of measured response, I mean, again, they're not doing everything right, but I mean, they didn't go in there and drop a nuclear bomb either. So the reality is we don't tend to appreciate or understand history very well in these situations. I was saddened, you saw at Ole Miss and you've seen at other campuses where others have come out and been more patriotic and as a sort of a counterbalance. Unfortunately, in the case of Ole Miss, one or two people did something that got caught on camera and it reflected poorly on Ole Miss. You're an Ole Miss graduate. How do you put that in perspective?
Well, look, you can always, in a crowd, the press will always find, somebody that's doing something that's wrong. And I don't think I think if you look at overall, what happened at Ole Miss, you saw a bunch of kids singing the national anthem. And are you going to have one or two people that say something that is unacceptable and that the masses at Ole Miss don't agree with? Yeah, sure, of course, on both sides. I'm sure, and it's not right to also judge, the quote protesters as, bad or anything. I mean, look, most of those folks, as far as I could tell in Oxford, they were peaceful. Yeah. And, and that's we want more freedom. And we want people to be able to have, certainly freedom of speech,
listen,
but just don't start breaking stuff.
As Haley often says, the media don't like airplanes that land safely. So they're going to find the one that didn't land safely. And that's what happened in Ole Miss, sadly. But the history predates it. So it's a complicated issue. But overall, most of those students met very well. Henry, it's been a pleasure to catch up with you, my friend.
Thank you, brother. It's great.
This has been Henry Barbour. It's been a great conversation. Listen, have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.